The problem nobody names. That's where we're starting today. Not because it's a mystery nobody has encountered, but because it's a problem so embedded in the way we move through the internet that most people have never thought to give it a name. Before we go anywhere, welcome. This is As an Aggregator, and what we're building here is something the creator economy has spent years overlooking: a system, a method, a language for the content consumer, not content creator, the content consumer. That distinction is the whole point of this video. And by the end, I want to name the problem that has been sitting underneath your content consumption habits, possibly for years, without you ever even knowing it was there. Let's get into it. Question 1. Right now, as a content consumer, you are navigating war coverage, climate disruption updates, macroeconomic turmoil, AI disruption, all of it arriving in your feed simultaneously, all of it competing for your attention at the same time. Most people consume all of that and do nothing with it afterwards. They scroll, they watch, they forget, they move on to the next thing. So the question is, what does it actually mean to be a content consumer in this environment? And what would it look like to do something with the content instead of just letting it wash over you? For me, that's where As an Aggregator comes in. Because we've developed specialized techniques, simple techniques really, in order to manage the information we consume in a way that is active instead of passive. What does that mean? Think about it. It means instead of just letting the content wash over you, we're actually saying there's a way to increase conscious competence in between the information you consume and the actual output of how your mind thinks about that information over time. It creates neural pathways when you start itemizing content into playlists. That's not a metaphor. That's what happens when you take a passive behavior and apply method to it. And that's why we came up with a name for this: playlist theory. Playlist theory describes what it means to use playlists to transform your experience from passive content consumption into active content consumption. That is the purpose of As an Aggregator: to bring you content you would otherwise not have access to, because we're all limited by our filter bubbles. The goal here is to bring forth the technique that allows other people to become content curators, to share the information they consume one title and thumbnail at a time. So what does it mean to be a content consumer in this environment? I'll let you sit with that. For me, it means taking on the role and the responsibility, actually having a fixed place within the creator economy. Specifically, it's called the creator economy, but really it's the creator, consumer, curator economy. It's a trigram at least. And I'll say this: I've started to wonder whether it deserves to be a quaternity, a fourfold structure for the content landscape. But we're not there yet in terms of understanding the fourth dimension of all of this. That's a tease, not a promise. We'll hold that for another time. So in this context, what does it look like to do something with the content you consume instead of just letting it wash over you? It's about placing content in between the consumption and the actual interaction with the platform. Putting videos into playlists itemized sequentially, non-sequentially, by name, title, and format. And that simple act of putting a video into a playlist can transform your life if you practice it habitually, conditionally. And I want to be clear about what conditionally means here. I'm not asking you to become a content curator overnight. You don't need to. But playlist theory works, specifically playlist theory for content consumers, Because content consumers can benefit from using playlists to organize their consumed digest, the videos they watch on a weekly, daily, monthly, and yearly basis. To track that insight into what they're actually consuming so they can figure out a reason why they're actually consuming it. And that's the key distinction there. So many people consume content passively, just consume in their spare time because they feel like they don't have anything else to do to fill the time. It can almost be a spiritual thing, what we use to fill ourselves, the immutable aspects of our theories of minds that contributes to who we are as people. That is what it means to do something with the content instead of just letting it wash over you. Let it wash. Let it wash. Let it wash. Question 2. The creator economy has spent years building tools, frameworks, and entire industries around content creators, the people who make the content possible. But it has almost entirely ignored content consumers, the people who actually watch it, as if content consumption is something so passive, so obvious that it requires no technique, no method, no discipline of its own. So, what is a content consumer really? And why has nobody taken that role seriously enough to build a system around it? Here's the honest answer. Content consumers were happy just being content consumers. That's the full circle of it. The reason content consumption hasn't been taken seriously, the reason nobody built infrastructure around it, is because the content consumer never needed elevation. It was just a passive flow and feed. They just consumed. That's it. That's why they didn't need more. What happened with me is that I wanted to take it a step further. I wanted to monetize my content consumption. I needed to figure out a way to build infrastructure in order to do that. And that infrastructure was playlists. That infrastructure was packaging my consume digest, packaging the content I consume on YouTube into bite-sized, packageable, manageable libraries, chapters, different ways of describing playlists, and handing that off to the YouTube hypergraph, handing it off to people at large so they could get access to my hypergraph as a reflection of the content I consume. But this is a genuinely interesting question. What is a content consumer really? A content consumer is just a content consumer. They consume content. That's why they don't need to have anything more. It's only when you want to elevate yourself from content consumer in terms of trying to do more with the content you consume that that question opens up. For me, that was curation. That was me trying to share what I learned through content consumption. That was me trying to itemize what I was actually consuming. That was me trying to communicate the content that was coming out of my wisdom tree. You just watch a video. Maybe you leave a comment. Maybe you like it, and then it's gone. Maybe it's in your watch history, and maybe you go back. Or maybe you put it into a watch later because you want to return, but you never do. There are so many idiosyncratic tendencies that occur as a reflection of just content consumption, just watching, just consuming, just being with the content. Content consumers have been largely ignored because of that reason, because of that function. That's why we decided to develop technique to help content consumers organize their consume digest, organize the content they consume using the tools given through the platform's own user interface. For me, I'm primarily on YouTube, so I mainly focus on YouTube content and playlists. But there are libraries and collections on TikTok now too, because the platform has added playlists like saving features. Why were content consumers neglected? Because there was no need to elevate beyond the content consumer. beyond being a content consumer. There was just the passive flow and feed. It was only until that content consumer says, there's something more that I'd like to do. There's something more I'd like to be. And that's where the development and the anchoring of becoming a curator begins. We're dealing with infinite content, a place where content is so expansive, so elaborative, so dense in velocity, it has a deluge effect. How do we deal with the deluge of infinite content? It's a question. Take a look at your screen and say, social science too quick pick. Question number 2, content creation is expensive. It costs you time, energy, editing hours, the mental load of consuming your own work during production, and then you have to do it again on the next piece. Believe me, I know that now. Content curation, on the other hand, routing a video into a playlist, adding it into a category takes seconds, minutes even. So why does the creator economy treat creation as the obvious next step for any content consumer who wants to go deeper when creation is sitting right there as a completely different and significantly lower friction path to doing something meaningful with what you consume? Maybe the simplest answer is in the name itself: creator economy. Because of how the internet's early macro breakout cycle worked, in terms of actually finding product market fit for people who had access to posting content on the internet, the platforms seeking to monetize that content through advertising, it was called the creator economy for a reason. It was an economy driven by the need to monetize what it was people were actually doing when they decided to post videos about their lives, when they decided to elevate production quality and then monetize off of that production quality. The creator economy treats creation as the obvious next step because of the name itself, because of how it worked in the macro breakout cycle of the internet. The actual purveyors of culture commentary, the people that drive the weather system on YouTube, TikTok, different social media platforms, that vision of how to shape the economy was top down, from creator to community. The naming itself excluded the consumer from the architecture. But here's what that framing missed. You have to understand consumption from the demand side. If you're a creator, you've already jumped in from the supply side. We're talking economics now, supply versus demand. Demand is the consumption side, the content consumer side. And we understand demand to a level that hasn't been formally rationalized into language yet, hasn't been put into technique, hasn't been captured in formal documents that describe what it actually means to understand the demand side of content consumption. That's a paper we're going to publish on Substack. Check us out there. And here's what I need you to understand about this question specifically. Curation was only available as a possibility when you were a very deep content consumer. You can't understand curation unless you've already been deep into consumption. And that's what it means to be a curator. Whereas if you're a creator, you've entered it from the supply side. And the further you move into creation, the more it can pull you away from the consumption discipline that makes genuine curation possible. That's the inversion the creator economy never named. How do you monetize content consumption? For me, that was the hardest challenge I faced. I thought to myself, I am a content consumer. I am a content consumer first and foremost. And that is what I would like to be. That is who I am. And I tried to stay within that lane. I tried not to expand any further than I needed from that identity because content consumption, first and foremost, was my occupation, my ideal, and my identity. So I figured people have to know what I see. People have to see what I know. People have to learn what I've learned as a content consumer using the technique these platforms make available. That technique was through the lens of playlist theory. That's what I had. That's what anchored me. Question 4. YouTube uploads over 500 hours of video content every minute. Every minute. To make that concrete, 500 hours is 100, to make that concrete, 500 hours is 1.8 million seconds, which means that in the 60 seconds it takes you to read one paragraph of this video out loud, YouTube has received 1.8 million more seconds of new content. In a single day, that adds up to roughly 720,000 hours, which works out to be about 82 years of video added to the platform every 24 hours. That number is confirmed by YouTube's own published data. When you take that number and apply it to your specific niche, your specific interest, your specific corner of the internet, what does that actually mean for you as a content consumer day to day? There's a lot of content out there. At what point does there's a lot of content out there stop being a statement about abundance and start being a statement about an operational problem that needs a solution? For me, that issue crystallized in two places. The first was my Watch Later playlist and the way it became unruly. Watch Later stops becoming Watch Later stops being a focused destination for high priority content when everything ends up in there. It becomes something perplexing, something where you start deploying technique, otherwise, you're going to lose access to the content you want to consume. Why? Because that content is coming at you from multiple directions simultaneously. One, it's coming from the recommendation feed, from the home feed. Two, it's coming from search, from things you're actively exploring out in the hypergraph of YouTube. And this is worth pausing on. YouTube is the second largest search engine on the planet. That's not a metaphor. That's the architecture. Three, it's coming from your subscription box, from the hypergraph references you've actually linked by subscribing to specific content creators. The abundance becomes an operational problem where you can no longer manage the velocity across all three of these inflows at once. So I started using ASAP Quick Picks. And ASAP Quick Pick, and this is the term we use it as an aggregator, and Mr. Pollock 890, our playlist archive channel, is a playlist type built around a single principle, ASAP, as soon as possible. It's content I want to consume right now, not for long-term archiving, not for deep categorization. Just, I need to watch this, and I'm making that intent visible by putting it into a named playlist structure rather than a generic watch later. Other people will come up with their own signifiers to brand their playlists. For us at Mr. Pollock 890, the brand is Quick Pick. We attach it to at least 70% of our playlists. It denotes placement inside our larger Quick Pick series. That act of naming, that act of creating a linguistic stencil to hold your intent, that's how the watch later problem starts to become manageable. The second operational need was dealing with subscription box velocity. My subscription box overflows. On mobile, I can only scroll back around 72 hours before it becomes physically taxing on my fingers. And the problem isn't just quantity, it's the velocity gap between legacy playlist channels that post once in a while and channels that post multiple times a day. That tension creates its own sorting problem. A once in a blue moon problem versus an every single day problem stacked in the same subscription box. If I let content sit in the subscription box without routing it, It disappears into the hypergraph. It disappears from my consume digest. It becomes lost to the timeline of YouTube because YouTube doesn't allow you to go back and itemize your subscription box by month or year. That indexing doesn't exist on the platform. They haven't built the technique to allow you to go back and sequence those titles and thumbnails by era. That data is meaningful there. That data is there, but it's not accessible in a way that makes it meaningful. So the abundance stops being a statement about abundance and starts becoming an operational problem the moment your existing platform surfaces, watch later, subscription box, home feed, can no longer hold what you're trying to keep. That is when you need technique. That is when playlist theory becomes practical, not just philosophical. Question 5. Most people's response to infinite content is to do nothing differently. Consume in silence. Scroll to the next thing. Let the algorithm decide what comes next. On the surface, that makes sense, because the algorithm is very good at serving you content you'll watch. But what is the actual cost of that default? What are you not building when you let the conform? What are you not building when you let the platform do all the routing for you? And is there a name for the thing you lose when you outsource every content decision to a recommendation engine? The cost is this: you become siloed within a filter bubble you can't even recognize exists, because all of your content consumption habits and patterns have been conditioned by the platform to create the best possible simulacrum of your preferences. The system has learned what retains you, and it shows you more of that, not because it wants to expand your world, because that is what optimizes for watch time. What you lose is access to hypergraph spokes. These are the connections that link out, that occur when you find a YouTube rabbit hole that takes you somewhere genuinely outside your usual orbit, away from what you normally consume and into a different part of the platform's architecture. A channel you didn't even know existed. A creator in the corner of the internet you'd never have searched for. That is what stops surfacing when you let the algorithm do all the routing. Now, the algorithm isn't evil. I want to be precise about this. The cybernetic ecology of YouTube isn't a malicious system. It's just optimized for retention. It gives you what you'll watch, not necessarily what would expand your surface area of awareness. The most effective thing you can do to extend your hypergraph spokes, outside of deliberately subscribing to new channels, is to actively search. Even when you've already found something through the recommendation feed or the subscription box, take that word, that phrase, that concept, that linguistic point plane vector, the word embedded in what you just consumed, and type it into the search bar. See what comes back. See if you expected those returns, those results. Click on an unexpected find. Check the related videos. Move sequentially through that section. The related videos tab isn't what it used to be, but for some searches, the right searches, it still opens a thread through the hypergraph that your home feed would never have surfaced. That is the thing you lose when you outsource every content decision to a recommendation engine. You lose the active seeking. You lose that muscle of articulating what you want before the algorithm can tell you what you want. And once that muscle atrophies, once recommendation surrender becomes the default, it is very hard to recover the posture of a deliberate consumer. Meta-stabilizing your consume digest means creating actual hypergraph tethers, deliberate subscriptions, deliberate playlist structures, deliberate search behaviors. That is how you extend outside your filter bubble. That is the cost of the default. Question 6. As an aggregator exists to solve a specific problem, the problem of being a content consumer in an environment of infinite content without a system, without a method, and without a language to describe what you're consuming and why. So, what is that problem called? What does it look like in the practice of a normal day consuming content? And what is the very first move that changes it? Here's my honest answer to what it's called. I didn't know when I started building this methodology. I knew what it felt like. It felt empty, without rhythm, without confluence, without the actual weight of what you're consuming being bundled into something you could hand to another person and say, here is what I've been thinking about. Here's what the internet has given me. Here is what I built out of all of this. But there's a name for it, and I think I have it now. I'm going to call it the intake gap. The intake gap is the space between what you consume and what you do with it, between the volume of content entering your attention and the complete absence of any system, method, or language for what that attention is actually building. You're receiving, but you're not constructing. Most content consumers live entirely inside the intake gap, not because they're not intelligent or not engaged, but because nobody built them infrastructure to get out of it. That is what it looks like in the practice of a normal day. You open YouTube, the home feed loads, you scroll, something catches your attention, you watch some of it, maybe you finish it, maybe you don't. And then the next thing is already there, already loading, already asking for your eyes. There's no moment in that sequence, no design moment, where the platform says, do you want to actually do something with this? Now, here's the honest thing I need to say. Right now, as I'm making this video, I wish I were consuming content instead. Point blank, period. To the left, you can see our Politics 2 quick pick scrolling from about a few years ago. It's what I wish I was doing. Consuming titles and thumbnails. Listen, I'm a content consumer first. That is my identity, my occupation, my ideal state. And sitting here creating takes something away from me. I feel that every time. But when I'm out there curating, when I'm working through titles and thumbnails, itemizing and indexing content into playlist structures, that's different. I'm still in the consumption space. I'm still with the content. I'm just doing something with it as it moves through my attention. That is the distinction between that is the distinction between curation and creation that the creator economy never built language for. And that distinction is the foundation of everything as an aggregator does. So what is the very first move that changes it? It starts with the title. Specifically, when it comes to creating playlists, it starts with the title. That is where the intake gap begins to close. You have to create a linguistic stencil, a name that represents the intent behind the playlist. You have to create a linguistic stencil, a name that represents the intent behind that playlist. Whether it's something as simple as an ASAP quick pick, which is just, I want to consume this as soon as possible, that's why it's going here, or something more specific to your niche, your domain, your corner of the internet. The moment you title a playlist, you've done something the algorithm cannot do for you. You're giving your consumption a place to land. You've created the beginning of a consumed digest that has your name on it, your intent behind it, structure holding it. That is how the intent gap closes. one playlist, one title, one first move. Take a look at the playlist scrolling on your screen. This is a quick pick. This is the content that we curate. The close, the problem nobody names. That's what this video has been about. The space between what content consumers do and what they could do if someone had bothered to build a system for the demand side of the creator economy. We're building that system. Here at As an Aggregator and Mr. Pollock 890, that is our playlist archive channel. That is where the methodology becomes something you can actually consume, traverse, and learn from directly. If this landed for you, if the intake gap is something you've been living inside without knowing what to call it, here is your first move. Go to Mr. Pollock 890. That's Mr. Pollik 890. You'll find a Start Here playlist. That is your on-ramp. The first structured set of content we've aggregated to show you what a consume digest can look like in practice. Or, if you'd rather start browsing on your own terms, go to the post section. Every publicly available playlist is there. Every unlisted playlist we've made accessible is there. Find something that matches your attention. Find something that matches where your attention already lives. And start. The algorithm delivers content. We deliver context. One title and thumbnail at a time. One title, one playlist, one move. This was the problem nobody names. We'll see you inside the hypergraph.